Yeah, welcome. So today we're going to begin our discussion on unit topic 1.1. This is going to be the developments in East Asia from 1200 to 1450. This is part of Unit 1, the Global Tapestry, for your AP World History course. So right away we go to slide 2. And you see a map here of what makes up East Asia and Southeast Asia. Modern day China, Japan, the Koreas, and Vietnam, these are the focus of developments in East Asia. But it is also worth reviewing the geography of Southeast Asian countries where Theravada Buddhism spread, as that will also be a brief topic of discussion in this section. Looking at the timeline, the Chinese dynasties, and giving you a little bit of background. This right here is not a complete timeline of Chinese history, and there is some debate about the first dynasty, the Xia dynasty, which preceded the Shang dynasty. The Republic period follows the last dynasty, the Qing dynasty. But it is important for you to see and understand that China had a long history before we get to the developments covered in the 1200 to 1450 period for Unit 1. So we'll begin this unit by looking at the Song dynasty, which lasted from 906 to 1279 CE. This puts us squarely in the Middle Ages, which it looks quite different in Song China than it did in Europe, which is, what most of us think of when we think of the Middle Ages. So let's give you a little bit of background on Confucianism. Confucius, also known as Master Kong, lived from 551 to 479 BCE during the Zhou dynasty. He is considered the most influential figure in Chinese culture, as his philosophies have permeated Chinese culture for more than 2,000 years. During the Han dynasty, Emperor Wu Di, who lived from 141 to 87 BCE, made Confucianism the state philosophy, and schools were established that taught Confucian principles. This helped to solidify the lasting impact Confucianism would have on China. Confucianism, it teaches the concept of filial piety, which is essentially respect for one's parents, one's elders, and ancestors. There was a hierarchy of authority where a son obeyed his father's wishes. A younger brother respected and deferred to his older brother, and women did the same with men. This hierarchy, it extends to many types of relationships, and it's supposed to create harmony. This would actually be a good point for you to pause real quick. There's a very short video on Canvas about Confucius. I recommend you go watch that video. There's 10 questions that I also have posted that can help you understand the contents of that video better. So go ahead and pause this slideshow here, go watch that video, and then come back when you're done. So the learning objective for this section is I want you to be able to explain the systems of government employed by Chinese dynasties and how they developed over time. This is going to fall under the P in your SPICE T acronym diagram that I gave you. Historically, empires and states in Afro-Eurasia and the Americas, they demonstrated continuity, how things continued to stay the same, as well as innovation and diversity in the 13th century. This included the Song dynasty of China, which utilized traditional methods of Confucianism, that continuity, and an imperial bureaucracy in innovation to maintain and justify its rule. The Song dynasty developed during the Middle Ages and lasted from 960 to 1279. Now, once again, Song China during the Middle Ages looks quite different from what we typically think of when we imagine the Middle Ages in Europe. The territory of the song, although it did not include all of China, as we can see from the map, you can see the Western Chia, the Jin, the Tibetans to the west, Dali to the southwest. Song is just that one area, right? So it did not include all of China, but it was large. And so governing such a large territory meant that you had to come up with new ways of maintaining order, and so from that a hierarchy developed. A complex system of provincial and regional authorities, they began to emerge. The Song dynasty is sometimes referred to as the progressive dynasty of China. They flourished economically, and they developed both internal and external trade. The construction of the Grand Canal was part of this major economic development. So looking at Song imperial bureaucracy and meritocracy, Emperor Taizu was the founder of the Song dynasty. He established rules for later emperors that would help maintain the imperial bureaucracy, which held the land under the Song dynasty together. Namely, he is credited with greatly expanding the civil service exam, which was used to select members of the government that would carry out the desires of the empire. The civil service exam, it ensured that the government officials that were selected were based on merit, what they knew, their knowledge, rather than by family connections or other forms of nepotism. This system is what we call meritocracy. He expanded educational opportunities, which allowed for greater upward mobility for the poorer classes, and this also contributed to many scientific advances and innovations. To pass the exam and become a civil servant, a person had to be well versed in Confucian teachings. Civil servants worked in the imperial bureaucracy. They were well educated and paid very well. They became part of an entirely new social class in Song China called the scholar gentry. So let's talk about Neo-Confucianism in the Song dynasty. How did that happen? Well, prior to the Song dynasty, Buddhism had been a favored religion philosophy in Tang-era China. Buddhism came to China from India via the Silk Roads, but really gained in popularity during the Tang dynasty. After the fall of the Tang, China entered a period known as the Five Dynasties period, which if you go back and look at the timeline, you can see right where that falls. This was a time of political instability, and the country was fractured. The Song dynasty follows the Five Dynasties period and brought with it unification and stability. The revival of Confucian ideals in the Song dynasty was a contributing factor to the strong government that allowed the Song to continue for about 300 years and brought a period of innovation and prosperity to China. The Confucian idea of filial piety was central to the strong bureaucracy and the Song government. Filial piety requires subordinate relationships with both the family as well as in society in an effort to prevent chaos and promote harmony. In other words, each person has a specific place and role in a hierarchy. During the Song dynasty, ideas from Buddhism and Taoism were combined with Confucianism to create what is now called Neo-Confucianism or New Confucianism. So what does the government organization look like in the Song dynasty? Well, the Song government operated as a large bureaucracy with the emperor as the head of the government. So they revived civil service exam. It was expanded and became more elaborate under the Song due to the ability to print books. There were 6 major ministries within the government that handled various governmental tasks, the day-to-day operations of the government, essentially. Officials within these ministries, they were selected based on the civil service exam system, which emphasized the Confucian teachings. This structure changed the previous system of aristocracy, the who you knew, in the Tang dynasty, to the one of meritocracy, what you know under the Song dynasty. So as we can see here, what I would like you to know when we look at the next section is to be able to explain the effects of innovation on the Chinese economy over time. Historically, the economy of Song China became increasingly commercialized while continuing to depend on free peasants and artisanal labor. The economy of Song China flourished as a result of increased productive capacity, expanding trade networks, and innovations in agriculture and manufacturing. So the thematic focus here is economy. This is going to be the E in the SPICE T acronym. So the Tang dynasty. This was the major dynasty prior to the Song dynasty. It was a period of advancement in both the arts and sciences. It's important to take a moment to look at what innovations carried over into the Song dynasty because the Tang's influence was a major part of the success in exploration, prosperity, and expansion of the Song dynasty. The magnetic compass and better maps made it possible for the Song to have a seafaring fleet and engage in trade outside of China. The expansion of roads and canals, including the Grand Canal, created the conditions that would allow the Song dynasty to be the most prosperous empire in the world. Movable type printing and the use of paper during the Tang carried over. That's that continuation again. So it carried over into the Song dynasty, and it played an important role in the Song's expansion of education and the civil service exam. With Confucius texts printed, more people were able to engage in the studies necessary to take the civil service exam and gain a desirable position within the Song government. The introduction of champa rice, a faster growing and drought-resistant strain of rice that came from Vietnam, changed the agricultural landscape in Song China. This rice, it could be produced much faster and it could be grown in areas where it was previously not possible to farm rice. The population boom that occurred during the Song dynasty can be attributed to the abundance of rice after the introduction of champa rice. Agricultural techniques grew and changed during the Song dynasty when steel production greatly improved agricultural equipment and decreased production times. Relatively complex methods of irrigation were developed. The use of fertilizer began, and plows were developed. A booming agricultural system allowed the economy to expand in other areas as a more efficient production process allows food production process allows for other areas of economic production to flourish. So we see this growing Song economy. China entered an area of proto-industrialization during the Song dynasty where rural areas began producing more than they could sell. This proto-industrialization differs from industrialization in that it is not large-scale production centers like factories, but rather small-scale production that occurs on a very local level, either within a home or within the community. The Song economy was heavily reliant on artisanal labor, skilled workers that produced goods in their communities. These goods included steel, porcelain, and silk, and they were traded both within China and through trade routes to other nations. Small-time producers realized that working to produce goods to sell at a market instead of working towards just self-sustainability provided for a higher quality of life. Additionally, a large part of the success of internal trade came from the Grand Canal. This is a huge waterway constructed to connect the Yangtze River and the Yellow River. The Grand Canal facilitated trade within China and was constructed in parts across several dynasties. The Grand Canal was greatly expanded under the Tang dynasty and set up the Song dynasty to have the most populous trading center in the world. As China's production processes grew from within, their ability to trade with other empires grew. The Song dynasty was known for its fleets of seafaring ships, and they became a dominant presence in the Indian Ocean trade network. The redesign of ships to be able to carry more cargo and advancements in cartography, which included the ability to carry paper maps on a ship, greatly increased the song's trading power. Paper maps and compasses were two Chinese inventions that made them very successful at long ocean voyages. These innovations could eventually spread to other parts of the world. Items traded along the Silk Roads included gunpowder and guns. Guns were a Song invention, and through the Silk Road trading routes, the rest of the world would eventually be introduced to this new weapon. Other traded goods included silk, jade, porcelain, and cast iron goods. Through internal trade via the land routes and the Grand Canal, and through trade outside of China via the Silk Roads and Indian Ocean, the Song dynasty would become a highly commercialized society. Production innovations included steel and iron. It was during this period that production of these items really grew. Cast iron products were a major export for Song China. The invention of paper money also spurred trading for the Song. They were the first in the world to develop paper money, and this made trade much more efficient. Paper money is much easier to carry than metal coins, and it changed commercial transactions. Silk was highly desired luxury textile in medieval times, and Song Dynasty China was the largest producer of the material. Silk was one of the most expensive items of trade available in the Afro-Eurasia trade networks, and it traveled further than almost any other export out of China. I mean, there is a reason the Silk Roads were named after silk and not another item that was exchanged. Because silk was such an expensive, high-value item, it was used by the Song and by neighboring empires like the Jin to the north to fund big projects, including military endeavors. On a more local level, people in Song China manufactured silk in their homes, and it was used to pay taxes and support individual families. So silk, it acted as a form of currency because of the way it was used. Most of the work that went into making silk was done by women. You will notice that most art pieces we see, including the one pictured here, that depict the silk making process from the Song era are almost exclusively of women. Historians argue that silk industry in China was a form of empowerment for women because they were able to make good profit from producing the textile to sell in markets. The money brought into Song China from the silk trade is partly responsible for funding other innovations like guns and printed texts. So I want you to take a second, pause the video, and read the excerpt below. And then I want you to think about the question and try to answer the question below. What effects do you think this shift had on the economy? So go ahead now, pause the video, read the excerpt, think about the question, and when you're ready, come on back. Okay, so some possible answers you could come up with for this question are by assessing taxes to fund the construction of public projects. The people laboring on the projects were generating an income by doing so. And what did this do? This put more money into circulation, and it incentivized people to work on public projects. Now, I have some additional notes on taxes that I'd like to say. Taxes existed in China prior to the Song, but they were levied via land taxes. Land taxes are a type of tax in which a percentage of the crop grown or livestock raised on a parcel of land are paid as a tax. The new type of system in Song China meant that people paid money, often silver, as taxes, making a fundamentally new era of economic activity for the Song's commercialized market state. The Song dynasty had the most advanced and sophisticated financial system in the world, and their tax system was a big part of that. Other East Asian states would model their tax system based on what the Song did. So let's examine the causes of commercialization in Song China. During the Song, China became a highly commercialized society. The graphic on the slide reviews 4 major contributors to China's commercialization, which includes food production, currency innovations, expanding trade networks, and general innovations in technology. Commercialization, it occurs when productions for profit begin to occur. Pre-commercialized societies are ones in which the purpose of production is survival. People produce food, clothes, shelter, what have you, for themselves. Or they produce one item and they trade locally for others they may need. Generally, pre-commercialized societies use a barter system instead of money systems. Once production begins to exceed what is locally necessary, the society begins to move towards commercialization. Products are then sold for profit, and production capabilities are often streamlined and efficiency is improved. During the Song dynasty, China became urbanized and commercialized. Commercialization and urbanization, they go hand in hand, and Song China is the perfect example of this. As production methods became more efficient, people are able to move to urban areas as they can get their staples imported to these urban centers. This allows for a concentration of people in a small area, which provides workers in luxury good industries. To have a silk manufacturing operation, for example, many people are needed that are not concerned with producing food and other day-to-day goods for their own survival. These urbanized centers, in turn, support further commercialization and the expansion of trade efforts by producing goods for export. The Song capital of Hangzhou is a prime example of an urbanized center in Song China. It had a population of over 1 million people, and it was filled with highly specialized markets where all kinds of goods could be purchased. Marco Polo even remarked that the Hangzhou was the finest city in the world when he visited the urban city during his travels. You can see from the map here on the slide that Hangzhou is situated right on the Grand Canal, which of course was a major factor in the commercial nature of the city. So let's speak a little bit about the Song China's tributary system. The kowtow originates in China and was a required gesture for any representative from a foreign and tributary state to perform for the emperor when they came to China. A kowtow involves a bow so deep that one's head actually knocks on the floor. The Chinese word literally means knock head. The gesture was actually most common in religious ceremonies, as it was a symbol of inferiority to gods or spirits being worshipped. The kowtow came to also be used to show respect towards and inferiority to the emperor, and to recognize the mandate of heaven, which is essentially the emperor's divine right to rule. The kowtow, it symbolized the larger relationship between China and its tributary states, and was also reflective of Confucian hierarchy and ceremony. The relationship of tributary states to China is not the same as other tributary systems in other parts of the world or in other time periods. The tributary system was a way for China to maintain strict control over all of its mostly friendly relationships with foreign states. It was a way to establish trading partners and enforce rules that kept those trading partners in line with Chinese ideals. Namely, China took an ethnocentric worldview that they were the center of civilization, hence the use of the Middle Kingdom to describe their state. Now, side note, the Chinese Zhonggu, or Middle Kingdom, was not used as a noun to name the state until after the dynastic period ended. Rather, it was a descriptor for the empire in both ancient and in imperial times, much like how land of the free is a descriptor to the name United States. The emperors of China ruled under the idea of the mandate of heaven, so they were treated as though they were divinely chosen. And the kowtow demonstrated that person understood that relationship and that hierarchy. The ultimate patriarchy manifested through the Chinese tributary system. China was the fatherly figure to all the children, which were the inferior states or empires that came to seek a trading partner in China. When a state approached China to enter into a trading relationship, they had to bring some form of tribute, which was usually large gifts or of regional items, and make a show of their understood place in the relationship with China. The kowtow was an important part of that. In return, the emperor would usually give more valuable, more lavish gifts to the foreign representatives visiting China to enter into this tribute trade agreement. China actually gave more than it received in the initial meetings, much like a father would give a child more than the child could ever give a father. This essentially created a barrier of sorts that separated China from what it viewed as inferior outsiders. Much like Confucius's filial piety, states had specific roles in this hierarchy, and as long as each player respected that role, prosperous trade would continue. Now, a special note on Vietnam. Song China's tributary relationship with Dai Viet, which is present-day northern Vietnam, stipulated that Vietnam would send tribute once every 3 years in exchange for protection from China. Vietnam had gained independence from Chinese occupation around the fall of the Tang dynasty, and it was Song Confucian morals combined with Vietnam's need for stability and protection that formed this specific tributary relationship. Now, while reconquering Vietnam was on the table at several points during the Song dynasty, eventually the tributary relationship softened and China reciprocated tribute. Part of Song China's prosperity and regional power came from tributary states, places that sent gifts or payment to the Song emperor. While tributary relationships varied from place to place, each state which paid tribute to China gained a trading partner and often more stability from the relationship. It is important to note that China largely viewed these tributary states as barbaric. For this reason, there was not an effort to make them an official part of China, as China viewed itself as superior. The kingdom of Champa was eager to be a tributary state to China because of the benefits of having them as a trading partner. The Champa kingdom is located in present-day southern Vietnam, and their chief tributary item was, of course, Champa rice. This is actually how the important crop was introduced to China. It was through the tribute from the Champa kingdom. Now, a note about Japan. The AMSCO textbook cites Japan as a tributary state of Song China. However, Japan as a state never entered into this relationship with China until the 1400s, which is much after the fall of the Song dynasty. There is evidence of some gifts sent from Japan to the emperor during the Song period, but it is a misnomer to consider the imperial court of Kyoto a tributary state to China during this specific time period. Most other tributary systems we will encounter in this course operate quite differently than Song China's. For example, the famous tributary system of the Aztec Empire was predicated on the threat of violence if tribute was not paid, and often the demanded tribute was so large that the tributary states found it impossible to comply. China did not operate its tributary system in this way. They demanded respect for and acceptance of their believed superiority, but they maintained a tribute-trade relationship that was mutually beneficial. Other states usually willingly entered into this relationship with China. This slide, it highlights the major differences in these tributary systems. So, why are they both called tributary systems if there are so many differences? What do you guys think? And what similarities do they possibly share? I want you guys to think about that a little. Okay, so as you're going through the next few slides, I want you to think about this learning objective. By the end of it, I want you to explain the effects of Chinese cultural traditions on East Asia over time. Historically, Chinese cultural traditions continued and they influenced neighboring regions. Buddhism and its core beliefs continued to shape societies in Asia and included a variety of branches, schools, and practices. So, because China enjoyed stability and a lot of advancement in technology, agriculture, and trade, the states that were located closest to the Song Empire were greatly influenced by Chinese culture. Korea, Japan, and Vietnam each absorbed various components of Chinese culture through their close ties, but each also sought to remain culturally distinct from China as well. The tributary system is largely responsible for the flow of ideas and traditions between these empires and states. This map here, it shows the routes which China's influences flowed. Japan received Chinese ideas and culture both directly from China and through Korea due to the fact that it was simply much closer to Korea than it was to China. Because Korea shares a land border with China, Korean culture has been influenced by the Chinese since ancient times. Rice and certain early pottery styles were imported to Korea from China. The Han Dynasty has many architectural design and clothing style influences in Korea. Chan Buddhism, a form of Chinese Buddhism, came to Korea during the Tang Dynasty when the Tang and Korea were engaged in a tributary relationship. China's advancements in both paper and printing resulted in many Korean texts being written in traditional Chinese characters. It wasn't until much later in the 1400s when the written Korean language, the Hangul, would be developed. During the Song Dynasty, influences in artwork were particularly notable. The Song brought both landscape painting and the painting of actual places, true view painting, to Korea. Many Korea paintings from this era are strikingly similar to those found in Song China. The bluish-white porcelain, called the Qingbai, and the style with which it was crafted made its way to Korea during the Song. A Qingbai-style bowl is pictured below. Many historical records were written during this time, and Chinese characters were still used in Korea during the time of the Song Dynasty. Most importantly for this course, however, is the Neo-Confucian ideas that either spread or became more solidified in Korea culture during this time. Notions of filial piety and a Korean version of the civil service exam used in China made their way firmly into Korea at this point. It is important to note that most Chinese cultural ideas that were adopted in Korea weren't simply transplanted, but rather they morphed into entirely new Korean forms of the ideas. Korea was always able to maintain a cultural distinctness from China in its culture, despite the heavy influences coming from China. Because of Japan's proximity to Korea, many Chinese cultural influences came through Korea rather than directly from China itself. Buddhist influences, however, were the result of Japanese religious scholars traveling to China and bringing Buddhist ideas and texts back with them. Pictured here is a book written in traditional Chinese characters by a Japanese monk named Myon Isai, who pilgrimaged to China and brought tea seeds and Chinese tea culture back to Japan. The book details a game or gamble in which tea drinkers must blindly identify the type or regional origin of the tea they are drinking. This is a particularly good example of Chinese cultural influence because the religious Zen-Buddhist connection brought the Japanese monk to China. The Chinese written language used by the educated, religious, and elite classes in Japan was used by the monk to record this. And the tea itself, as well as the customs that accompany tea drinking, all came from a single person's visit to Song China. Tea drinking and the accompanying ceremonies continue to be a large part of Japanese culture today. Although Vietnam generally rejected Confucianism because they did not have the same patriarchal ideas as China and as Confucius, they did adopt Confucius elements during a restructuring of its government's administrative system. This happened during the Song dynasty. Eventually, Confucianist ideals were embedded in the daily lives of those living in Vietnam. Additionally, Vietnam adapted Chinese tax and legal systems during this time. Cultural traditions that originated in China and spread to Korea, Japan, and Vietnam are numerous, and many are still visible in the modern day. Most importantly for this course is the idea of filial piety. East Asian cultures are still heavily influenced by this Chinese Confucian idea, and it can be seen in family and society structures across Korea, Japan, and Vietnam still. Pictured on this slide, you will see green matcha tea, which is a powdered tea that is very popular, specifically in Japan. While Japan has a uniquely Japanese tea culture, the origins of the tea itself, the method of grinding the tea to a powder, and some of the foundations of the Japanese tea drinking traditions all came from China. It is also common to see the use of Chinese characters, the kanji, in Japan, especially in street signs and place names. Other influences that had lasting impact on Korea, Japan, and Vietnam include Chan Buddhism, architecture styles, clothing styles, and some government structures. So let's take a look at how Buddhism spread into China. We begin our look at Buddhism through its introduction into China from India. China was, as we have learned earlier, a huge vehicle for spreading ideas into East Asia, and the same is true for Buddhism, even though it is not a natively Chinese religion. China develops Chan Buddhism, which moves into other East Asian areas. As you will see with China's history on a macro, like a bigger level, they pivot between allowing foreign ideas in to shutting foreign ideas out. This holds true with Buddhism, as it was embraced heavily in the Tang dynasty to the point where Tang rulers feared the prevalence of Buddhism was too great and referred to it as a cult of barbarian peoples and evil. During the Song dynasty, as you already know, Confucianism was revived and combined with Buddhism to create Neo-Confucianism. This is a wonderful map to help visualize the spread of Buddhism throughout not only East Asia, but to see its full trajectory. We will discuss the differences in the various types of Buddhism on the next slide. So there are just the very surface basics of Buddhism. These here are just the very surface basics. It is not terribly necessary to get into the details of the Eightfold Path during this unit, but it is helpful for you to have some concept of the religion as you look how it's spread through East Asia. So there are three distinct forms of Buddhism. Theravada is mostly limited to Southeast Asia. Mahayana encompasses the Buddhism which spread via China and includes both Chan and Zen Buddhism. And then Vajrayana is Tibetan. So a note about Tibetan Buddhism. It contains elements of both Vajrayana and Mahayana, but its traditions are built around Vajrayana Buddhism, making it quite distinct from the Buddhism practiced elsewhere in East Asia. So Theravada Buddhism is the older, more traditional form of Buddhism that teaches the path to nirvana, which means ending the cycle of reincarnation. This is generally only attempted by monks, as strict meditation is required, rendering it difficult for everyday people. In contrast to Theravada, Mahayana Buddhism, which took the strongest hold in East Asia, takes a more communal route. It focuses on working to bring others into the path towards enlightenment, and Buddhists must work towards this goal for others. For this reason, Mahayana Buddhists do not seek to break the cycle of reincarnation, because without it, they could not continue to help others. Vajrayana translates to Thunderbolt vehicle, which emphasizes the fast yet difficult route to nirvana. So make sure you take some time to review the key ideas from this unit. And if you have time, I recommend checking out Heimler's Topic 1.1 video for some additional supplemental information.